Today, we're going to talk about The Acolyte, Episode 6. Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. In the episode list, this episode is called Teach/Corrupt, which seems like a pretty big stretch to me. A bit of conversation / a whole lot of nothing would be a more accurate title. A note about this review. The episode cuts between several unrelated storylines in order to make it seem more exciting, but I'm going to discuss each storyline as one thing to make it easier to keep track of. The episode picks up with Osha waking up in a cave. After some very slow exploring, which admittedly is justified, she discovers a bag with shoes and clothes that fit her, possibly May's. Then she goes outside and we get a very cinematic drone flying back shot of the very pretty island in the middle of an ocean that she's on. If you pay careful attention in the corner right at the end, you'll see Manny's ship parked on a tiny barrier island right next to the main island. And I gotta say, drones have really just improved the quality of cinema a lot, especially lower budget stuff, although this isn't low budget by any means. In the next shot, we get this from a different angle, and we get the text, "Unknown planet." Unknown to who? They don't say. As Osha wanders outside, after a while of looking around, she finally looks to her right and sees Manny walking off, so she follows him. They play this like there's some sort of danger and she's sneaking as if it's plausible that he doesn't know where she is, so they squeeze an extra minute or two of screen time out of him getting to a pond where he goes for a swim, naked. We learn two main things from this. First, Manny Jacinto looks great with his shirt off. Second, the character has an enormous scar on his back. It's very jagged, but looks kind of like a lowercase y. After she peeps on his swimming naked for a bit, Manny talks to Osha, because somebody actually can use the Force, apparently. He's very gentle with her, and this is where Manny Jacinto's acting skills really shine. He's playing a character who's acting, but acting very well, and consequently seems very genuine, though not quite perfectly. And this is in relation to how Manny Jacinto played the character at other times, so it really is a matter of skill on his part, and that's impressive, dialing your acting skill down just a touch, because that's what the character would do. It's really impressive. Anyway, Manny the character is actually reasonably candid, given that he likes to make most of his replies indirect, that he wants to turn Osha to the dark side. But he's extremely fair and reasonable about it. And there is some decent dialogue. Osha asks if he's killed Sol, and he replies that he didn't. And she asks if he killed May, and again he says, this time with disappointment in his voice, that he didn't. He then adds that it's interesting that she asked about Sol first. It's a special relationship, isn't it? Master and pupil. There's a hidden... the intonation gives it kind of a hidden meaning, too. Or a subtext. The rest of their conversation takes up about half the episode, and it's halting in a kind of realistic way. Osha knows that she's powerless in the situation, and also knows that Manny is a villain who wants to turn her into his disciple. But she's curious, and he plays up being reasonable. A few things come up, though of course we have no way of knowing if they're true. Manny says that he'd actually been trained by the Jedi, actually, you know what, this part's interesting, so I'll quote it. "You speak as if you were a Jedi. I was, a long time ago. I never heard of you. It was a really long time ago." In a competently written show, this might suggest Manny is much older than he seems, and raise the question of whether he is the Darth Plagueis who taught Palpatine. In a competently written show. There's a decent amount of dialogue between them, and it doesn't really go anywhere, which is perhaps a triumph of realism over art. In real life, this kind of seduction takes a long time, and the one doing the seducing has to be mostly passive. And this, Manny is. He really does all of that quite well. It's not so fun to watch, but it is realistic. There's a curious part where she asks if he used the same line on her sister, and Manny replies that he made a mistake with May. He thought she wanted more than revenge. He thought she wanted what he wanted. When Osha asks, "What is that?" He replies, "The power of two." I'm not sure if that's meant as a serious reference to the Space Witch's absurd philosophy of counting, or whether that reference is humorous and he just means someone who wanted a relationship. Not necessarily a sexual relationship, like the master-pupil relationship he mentioned earlier as being a very special one. There's a curious part where Osha asks about the giant scar on Manny's back, and he asks her how she thinks he got it. He tends to deflect questions with questions. And she says it looks like someone stabbed him in the back, and asks if it was his Jedi Master. He just doesn't answer. And again, that's pretty good manipulation. But it's also kind of annoying that Osha isn't exactly the sharpest light bulb in the picnic basket. You don't get a jagged 2-foot-long branching scar from being stabbed. It would be hard to be more wrong than guessing stabbing. I'm not sure what even could produce a scar like this. My best guess would be being dragged along and then getting caught on something. And then the why would be from like where the skin actually like tore in sort of two places. Anyway, there's another good part after he finished repairing his helmet when he says that it's handy against lightsabers, but is also a sensory deprivation helmet, like they used to wear as younglings. It's just you and the Force, and what you bring with you. Then he suggests she try it on, and she replies, "I don't trust you." And he forthrightly replies, "Nor should you." It kind of goes downhill after this. He then tells her that she should learn to trust herself, which is, again, decent manipulation, if a very annoying thing to hear. And then he just leaves to give her space. And the climactic final moment of the episode is she tries on the helmet and breathes heavily. And the helmet looks as absurd as ever. Okay, so the second major storyline in this episode is Sol and May. We pick up their story on the Wookiee Jedi planet as they get to their ship. Sol tries to transmit a message to Jedi headquarters about what happened, but for no reason the comms are very bad, staticky and breaking up and stuff, and the message mostly doesn't get through. May creeps up behind Sol with a knife in her hand, looking for all the world like she's planning to kill him, but when Sol gets up, tells May, and he calls her Osha, that he's going to reset the comms and walks past her and tells her to take the wheel. She just puts the knife away and does it. It's actually a yoke, by the way, not a wheel, but whatever. So she actually gets in the pilot's chair, as he asked her, and steers them into space to dock with their interstellar thrust section, which she knows exists for some reason, despite the fact many ships don't do that. Anyway, Sol goes and resets the comm system, and while he's doing it, and has a moment of downtime, we see how upset he is. She bangs his fist on a console. Now, after he's done, we see Basil, the 2-foot-tall bipedal capybara, walking around and sniffing and gibbering in his native language, which reminds me a bit of the sounds made by the RUSs in The Princess Bride. Why he's spying on Sol, I've got no idea. The storyline is mostly just technical problems that people need to fix, and Sol saying vague things. For example, "It's time for me to face the council and tell them everything." Mostly things get fixed by rebooting them, and we're always interrupted before Sol can see anything substantive, so it's pretty repetitive. I think they're trying to tease the audience, which is a bad tonal choice. There's also a weird subplot where Basil walks around in various places, even though in theory he's intelligent and speaks a complex language, that was a plot point earlier, he could have the intellect of a freaking rodent for all the difference it makes. He has no discernible goals, and his actions all seem quasi-random at best. And then at one point he decides to attack May after dancing around like an idiot. He can tell that May isn't Osha by her smell. This culminates in his finishing move of stomping on her foot before running off. I think Basil is the worst character in this show. I mean, there's a lot of competition for that, but I think he wins. It's kind of a pity that Manny didn't kill him, too, back on the Wookiee planet. At some point, Sol figures out that May is May, not Osha. We really don't know what that point is. But towards the end of the episode, Sol uses the stun gun to stun May, then handcuffs her to a bed in sickbay. He tells her that they've got to find her master and rescue May, but for 16 years he's been thinking about what he would say to her if he ever saw her. So right now she's going to listen to him. Why he stunned her and handcuffed her to a bed in sickbay in order to tell her whatever it is he'll tell her in some other episode, I have no idea. Earlier in the episode, she basically asked him what happened with the space witches, so he had every reason to believe she would listen without having to be knocked out and chained down. They cut away before he says anything, of course, and that's the end of this storyline. The third storyline in this episode is Master Vernestra and an underling of hers named Mog. Mog received the call from Master Saul and reported to Vernestra that Saul said his entire party was wiped out. Vernestra, Mog, and several nameless Jedi then go to the Wookiee planet, the Wookiee Jedi planet, sorry, not the planet with more than one Wookiee on it. Not the Wookiee homeland, the planet the Wookiee Jedi was on, I mean. I can never remember the names, none of them are good. Although there's the scene where Mog expresses surprise that she's going because hyperspace makes her queasy. She says that hyperspace doesn't make her sick, just uneasy. And then they go. This is a nonsensical plot point that presumably was some kind of joke, maybe even an in-joke, but you never know. Maybe it's supposed to impress upon us how seriously Master Vernestra takes this. When they get to the Wookiee Jedi planet, Vernestra simply knows where to go and leads the other Jedi straight to the Wookiee's hobbit hole. They look over the battle, and for some reason Vernestra has Mog say what happened by looking at the signs, and he looks at the footprints and lines and all the lightsaber wounds on the dead Jedi and accurately says what happened. Then one of the giant flying beetles from the previous episodes decides to attack them, even though none of them are emitting light, but Vernestra pulls out her lightsaber whip and cuts it in half. The lightsaber whip is absurd and stupid, and it even looks dumb. By the time you're using a lightsaber whip, why not a blaster? Admittedly, the lightsaber whip would probably be unblockable by another Jedi, but that's a weird consideration for a Jedi to have. Anyway, Vernestra, as always, seems like she's secretly a bad guy, and Mog is timid and seems terrified of her. Given how much the writers are willing to telegraph their big reveals, maybe she is actually Manny's master, or at least in league with him. Anyway, that's it. Apart from the conversation between Osha and Manny, this episode was just burning time. I don't know what the point of that could be. They could easily have cut down Vernestra's time or cut it out entirely if she's not the big bad in this series. And they could have cut about 95% of the Sol and May scenes instead of constantly having them about to say something, then get interrupted and never pick it up again. And they should have cut 100% of the scenes with Basil in them, regardless. All of which would have left more time for Osha and Manny to talk to each other, which would have been a much better way to spend the episode. There are 2 more episodes in this series, and I have a bad feeling that the next episode is going to be another filler episode. But until then, you hit everything you aim at. If you like this video, then clicking the like button, according to YouTube, will make them more likely to recommend it to others. If you know anyone who might get something out of this video, then it would be kind to share it with them, or just share it on social media in general. And if you'd like to see future videos of mine, you can subscribe. And if you're not in the habit of checking your subscriptions page regularly, then I suggest clicking the notification bell and setting that to always, because otherwise subscribing to a channel basically just sort of like gives YouTube a hint that maybe it should consider recommending these videos to you, possibly at some point, if they think so. It's a funny world we live in. God bless.